thanks a lot for inviting me, and all of you for coming here in this date. That if I think about a seminar talk in my university on a Khalid day of June like this, everybody will be gone. There will be like 2 people in the audience. So I really appreciate that you're taking your Friday afternoon and coming to listen to what I have to tell you in here. I hope you can have some time in the weekend to recover from all this. So I'm going to present you my work on emotions in the internet society, but it's not only constrained to the internet and social media. It's more in the real society with all this new medium of communication that is the online medium or the internet. So I will talk about three topics that map to the 3 latest papers that I also brought some prints out from. The first one is about emotional expression in online communities and what are the biases of using certain words online. And then second, I will talk about the measure of polarization of the European mood or the European state of the society through Eurovision, which is quite a funny source of data. And third, I will talk about the concept of social resilience and a work that we did that we call the autopsy of Friendster. That was a large social network that failed and everybody got away from it and moved to MySpace and Facebook. So we did the analysis of the corpse of the social network, and that's what I will present in the end. So first of all, I come from the chair of systems design in ETH. That is a multidisciplinary group. We are 25 people, and we research in economic networks and social organizations. So in general, we are physicists and computer scientists, but we are not in any of those particular fields. We try to answer and tackle questions from economics or social sciences and apply all these tools that we are borrowing from math or from statistical physics to understand something else about organizations or about economical networks. Here I have these 2 examples of our works. One of them is a network of ownership between companies, and then we could find some cores of ownership containing certain subgroups. So the other one is a network of bots that are living together. So we are not constrained to humans or to the internet. We are looking into complex systems in a wider scope. So our special highlight or our methodological approach is, we call it data-driven modeling. So we don't want to just make computational models and simulate something in a virtual world. We want this to be rooted in the real data, in empirical analysis. So we want to find dynamical explanations for what we find online or what we analyze, but we don't want to simply stay on the analytics of the data or on the simulation. We want to bring everything together. So myself, I work more in the subgroup of online behavior and more social sciences. So I'm not going to talk about our economics research and depth and systemic risk. I will talk about our works in collective emotions on the internet. So the first point of them is this about emotional expression. So the question is part of a larger project that was called Cyber Emotions. And in this project, we were tackling the question of collective emotions that were defined as emotional states searched by large amounts of individuals in a certain society. So you have a group of people, and for certain reason, there's an emotional state that is shared among a really large amount of them. This state doesn't need to be exactly the same for each individual. It might be that some people are angry and happy at the same time, but what happens is that there is some emotional state that stays along the individuals for some reason. And the question was, when is it possible that this emerges from the interactions of those individuals? So then the Cyber Emotions project was created to understand these emotions on the internet. So the example I use here is they call the Boxy phenomenon. So Boxy was a YouTube user that made a typical video blogging video. It was just 5 minutes of a teenager girl talking complete nonsense in a very excited way about her friends and so on. And it did not have any content. It did not have any political content, any opinion, nothing. It was just, I don't know, herself. So it triggered lots of messages that were about loving or hating her. There was nothing else that was anything to discuss about. It was people that really liked her and people that really hated her or felt disgusted about her. And this led to a large avalanche of people really interacting about this particular video and this particular individual on the internet, up to the point of being the most subscribed channel in YouTube in January 2009. So the point is that there are lots of videos like this. He had made videos before, but there was this particular one that created this large scale. So what we try to argue is that it's not the video itself or something that the video contains. It's simply a path dependency of an escalation of interaction in between the individuals that created this that we call the collective emotion. So
is it
yes.
Real time?
What?
Is it real time video?
The video?
Yes.
No, it was a 5-minute video that was put online, and then
Yeah, just online.
and then they were just commenting about this video. So then here, this is, for example, some snapshots of people that were sharing and talking about it. These are like the typical memes that people use.
Like a chat roulette?
No. This was simply, it was really left somewhere on the internet in a corner where it would be ignored like anything else, but what was created around it was something that was really emergent. It was not really easy to predict by the content of the video as such, or her relevance or anything. So we're used to see this kind of viral behavior online, and the question of this project was to understand the emotional influence of it, if it's really some sharing of emotions or is just some sort of cascade of things that have nothing to do with any emotional behavior. So as I mentioned, this project is called Sever Emotions and is now finishing. We are almost at the end. It was funded by the European Union, and the idea was to explain collective emotions as large-scale states in the whole community of people that are interacting online through the interactions of individuals and the individual states of emotions of their particular people. So the point is that we could analyze this at the two different levels. One of them is from internet data, so we applied sentiment analysis to large data sets from online interaction to measure and have a quantitative approach to the whole collective emotion. Then we could have experiments from psychology and people in front of the computer with physiological signals and surveys and so on to understand the individual dynamics of emotions. And the idea is to connect both with agent-based modeling, to know what are the conditions that trigger to one of these large cascades of behavior and the conditions that do not. Everything rooted on empirical analysis on both sides, at both levels, both the collective and the individual. So of course this is a wide project, and I wish I could tell you everything we did for these 4 years of research, but now I will focus only on the last work that we did for it. So just as an overview, I just advertise here our papers. The first one was working on this agent-based model in a more theoretical sense. So what do we need to connect these individual emotions to the collective state? So we based ourselves in dynamics following core affect from the theory of James Russell, which is this theory of really short-lived states, that emotions are something that influences you in a very short time, but it's not something like a mood that might last for a whole day, or a feeling that you have a conscious thought about something. It's something really simple, like, for example, anger or excitement at a certain moment of time. So what we did is that we were able to connect which conditions of these dynamics will lead to this collective behavior and formulate some hypotheses to then test in experimental data from individuals. So this has led to another line of research that is testing these individual dynamics. So what we did following from that was to focus on emotions on the internet, just on the data, and see if this really exists and what are the conditions online itself, not without any individual dynamics. So first we studied emotions in Amazon product reviews. So typically somebody buys something and then starts commenting about it, usually just writing a long elaborated review or something very short. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but what happens is that there is a collective response of the whole Amazon community to the product. A very bad product that nobody really cared about has like a couple of negative reviews and disappears, but some other products have more complex dynamics. They have a lot of positive reviews in the beginning that then they're overcome by some negative reviews of more critical and less biased people, so to speak. So we analyzed empirically this and reproduced these kind of shifting patterns of behavior with one of our models. And just showing an overview here, if you're more interested, we can talk later, or you can also read the references I put here. So the third application we did was to real-time interaction. So in product reviews, you'll see a review that somebody wrote 10 days ago or something like that. There's no real interaction between the people. It's just a one-way influence. But in many other places on the internet, in, for example, IRC discussions, in IRC channels, people are talking real time and they're exchanging very short messages. So we gather a data set from these collective discussions, but they are all real time and most of them are completely anonymous and you don't know who you talk to. And then we could understand these social norms, or like how people follow each other in terms of emotions. So if you say something nice, you don't reply with something very evil. You try to follow a collective topic that stays in the community. And again, we could reproduce this behavior with some models and understand the conditions under which it would emerge, even in the presence of anonymity. And the fourth point is what I will talk about now, that is the statistical analysis of emotional expression across online communities, not only focusing on a particular one, but to try to find some universal rules of emotional expression online. And the motivation for this was the Pollyanna hypothesis. So the idea is humans have a bias towards the usage of positive words. We try to say nice things. Even when you're trying to criticize someone, you start saying, thanks a lot, your talk was very interesting, but I think your research is nonsense. You know, in the end, you try to say something nice and then you go straight for the bad thing. Or there's always some sort of cover of positivity that we have in our communication. And this is extremely relevant for this kind of quantitative analysis that we are doing, because when we are applying sentiment analysis to the messages, I was used to colleagues claiming all the time that they had found positive collective emotional states, that they were finding certain levels of positivity in discussions and so on, and they were claiming that there was a collective emergence of the interaction of the individuals. But the question is, how positive is positive? Is really zero valence neutral, or is there a shift of positivity that we all have embedded in the way we work, in the way we talk, in the words we use? So the idea was to simply look into different online communities and assess if this really exists. So here I'm showing just simply 7 different online communities, and I'm showing a histogram of the valence of the messages written in those communities. So again, this sentiment analysis tool tells us for each message what is the valence of the message. And what we found is that in most of them, in general, there is a positive bias. In the product reviews in Amazon, people make a review if they have something nice to tell. In MySpace messages, there we have a lot of teenagers talking with each other and supporting and saying how nice they are. In Twitter, we have people saying, good morning, Twitter, welcome to the world. In YouTube, I was expecting it to be very negative. In general, if you post a video in YouTube, the first comments you get is somebody insulting you directly. But in the end, while having a random unbiased sample of YouTube comments, we could see that they were also positive, that in the end people are using more positive terms. In these last 3 down here, I'm showing them because they are using a different sentiment analysis tool because the texts are really small. So we have like a bit of this bimodality, but in the end we see that most of the time, at least IRC channels, the real-time discussions, we have most positive messages too. Garcia, these are open source development forums in which people are collaborating in a project. They also tend to have a bit of positivity. And the only place where I could find a bit of negativity was in an online anonymous forum called 4chan, in which nobody has a username. Everybody's there free to write anything they want without any kind of constraint, any kind of moderation. And there I found a bit of negativity, which basically made me think, is this truly an outlier, or there are different things out? Is there a universal rule and this is kind of violating it? What is the real reason?
Sentiment analysis, how is it kind of, what is the point of measuring positivity? What's kind of a 0 point of positivity?
How is it done?
Put words into either positive or negative categories?
Yes, not exactly like that. We're using in all of them, yeah, we're using SentiStrength. It's a sentiment analysis tool that is a lexicon-based tool, but it does not really look only for the frequency of words. It also looks for their context. So if they are negated, if you say, I am not fine, it doesn't say this is positive, it says this is likely negative. So SentiStrength gives 2 values of positivity and negativity in the text, positive and negative sentiment.
How is, let's say, the 0 point calculated? Because you need to say whether an expression is positive
exactly.
or neutral or likely positive.
There you get the point. Here is just simply counting this row with a sentiment lexicon, and it's telling this is positive and this is negative. Basically what we're seeing here is that positive is not really positive, or like neutral is not really neutral, it's a bit negative. What we are finding is that we need to calibrate all this sentiment analysis to tell us something. Exactly. So there is, it is not relevant when they tell you that you are finding 0.2 in the scale of -1 to +1 of valence, because this is the standard case basically. So then here we were trying to really fine-grain more our analysis and kind of try to discard all these positive collective emotions that do not really exist.
For example, if somebody says that's okay, it's theoretically positive, but it's kind of
doesn't mean much. Yeah, or like good morning, or I don't know, have a nice day. The person that is telling you in the shop doesn't really want you to have a nice day. He's just saying it for any reason. So also I will come up to this point of what does this really mean. But I will say that the tool itself is trying to be as agnostic as possible, so to speak, as just giving us a point, a number, and then by looking at how this number works, we're really telling what is positive and what is negative. So we went into the whole internet and like look into a most unbiased data set to really assess this base point of emotional expression. And the idea was to really take something extremely large. We had access to the Google Web 1T dataset that is 1 trillion of tokens from the surface of the web. So we have a really large sample of usage of words in the whole internet, in everything that is at least accessible by a search engine. And what we did is that we combined this with lexica from word valence. So we took the 3 standard lexica for valence in English, German, and Spanish. And our point is also to try to span as much as possible communication on the internet. Of course, here we're biased to Western languages. We cannot really measure emotions in Japanese or Chinese, but at least we are able to cover 67.7% of all the websites at the point of the crawl. So to some extent, we're able to say that we are looking at the internet as such. If this is humanity, it's different, but we look at humanity through the internet and we find something. So the result was that we found here, these are the word clouds for the usage of words in each of the 3 languages, with words corresponding of a size corresponding to their frequency online, and a color ranging from green to red, that is not very visible, green for positive valence and red for negative valence. So this is just one way to qualitatively show that there is this prevalence of positive valence in the emotional expression. Here, basically, you are seeing the words reweighted by their frequency, and you see that there's much more green and partially green than red or very dark red. So there is a absence of negative words, and of course we quantified this and we tested such hypotheses. So here I'm showing in the left column the histograms of words in the lexica themselves, so just counting with frequency 1 each word. So we found that all the lexica are basically having a mean of 0. They are centered around the 0 valence, and the way they were designed was to try to span words along the whole range of valence. But then when we go and we reweight these terms by their frequency online, we see that the mean and the medians are very shifted. They are really, really positive. So if we look online, we find that the negative terms happen much less often than the positive ones. And this is consistent in the 3 languages. So then our question was, is this just simple biased, or there's something else? Is this only present on the internet? And we try to validate this with other sources from books. And it was consistent. It wasn't as strong in the books as in the internet, but there was also a positive bias. So the question is, how does this affect our communication? Is there something else rather than the bias? Does it have a purpose, or does it influence something? So we went one step further and we measured information content in the words. So the definition of Shannon information content is basically a measure that is negatively, is inverse to the frequency, but also inverse to the surprisal of the information of a word. So the idea was to measure what is the content, the information, or how surprised you are by finding a word in a certain context. So the simplest information estimate is just the negative log frequency of the word. But we can extend this and look into the context of a word, or how many contexts a word can appear in. So for example, here the word violent, in the context dangerous murderers are violent, contains much less information than in the context fluffy bunnies are violent. Because we are not expecting to hear the word violent when something is talking about bunnies, but we're expecting this quite a lot when they're talking about murderers. So the point is that words have information content that depends on the amount of context they can appear. So in the end, the more specific and unpredictable words contain more information, not only the least frequent ones. And thanks.
What do you decide as the context? Is that the collection of the words?
I say it here. So the context is the word neighborhood up to distance 4. So this work was already presented by Steven Piantadosi in PNAS already a couple of years ago. And the idea is that you can estimate, have a better estimation of the real information content of a word if you look at the 4 grams, not only the 1 grams for the single frequency. It's like an extension of Zipf's law. So we don't really look only in the frequency of a word, but on its role in the communication channel, on how much information it contains from one person to another.
The neighborhood before and after?
Around, no. Only the word within this neighborhood. So there might be words before or words after these 4 words. So the word contained anywhere in these 4 terms. So this is because the Google Ngram dataset contains the frequencies for up to order 5 actually, or up to 5 grams, but it's not complete, the 5 grams, because of course it explodes exponentially. So there are frequencies, and still, even if it has 1 trillion tokens, it requires some smoothing to calculate the information content that is a measure of entropy. So I would say that there are still some technology and some assumptions behind this measure of information content, but so far it's like quite a good estimation, and it correlates with word length and all these principles that we know from linguistics. So the question was to see if there is an influence of emotional content in information content, and the opposite. If words with different emotional content contain more or less information, as this feeling that I explained before, when somebody tells you good morning, it doesn't really mean anything. So what we found is that indeed positive words carry less information than negative words. In the left, I'm showing the analysis for English, in which each one of the boxes contain 10% of the words of the lexicon. They are arranged according to the information content, and they have a color proportional to the valence. So you see that words with more information content have a more red color, and their size is also proportional to the information content to have the feeling of how negative is the message, the language in terms of information content, but not in terms of frequency. So
Information content is what?
as measured here before. So from the frequencies, we use this formula basically. So context.
Isn't that in a sense trivial what you're saying? You're saying that negative words are less common. If they are less common, the probability is lower, so by definition you have a higher information.
Exactly. So I don't say that by definition they have less information content because we take the context into account. So what I'm saying is that it's not only the frequency but also the neighborhoods in which they are used that predict what is going to be their emotional content. So to speak, looking at the frequency is a way to think about it as I presented, but we wanted to go one step further and say what is the role of emotional terms inside the whole communication process and not just by selecting them. So it's basically, you might say that we are refining the value of information content or trying to have a better estimation of what is the information content of a word. So we're simply trying to be at the state of the art of research and really say if there is some more information rather than just some lower frequency.
Just in plain words, I'm still struggling. Information content is because the word is significantly standing out versus the context?
Not only, no. So the
More unexpected. So if I would say children playing in the room and locomotive, the locomotive would be information
content, yes. So if this word is used in certain very unpredictable contexts in a way that people are very surprised about it all the time.
If you look at grounded theory, that would not be confirmed.
Out of what?
Grounded theory?
What's no idea.
Look it up. Maybe it's a whole theory on qualitative research. And the locomotive in the garden would not be considered information.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's almost in contrary to.
I will say that, of course, in this example, I'm not really sure, but the point is how often.
You should look at grounded theory.
That's a good. Okay, that's a really. I will ask you later, because the point is like if this sentence was used before and it appears in the data, if it has some higher frequency, higher chances because there's a semantic relation between them, then we're likely to see it and give it less information content. So I will say that we are not creating semantic networks or any kind of analysis that we can understand anything from it. What we are doing is just looking at the data and measuring what will be information content in the Shannon entropy context, as if it was a bit that is being transferred from a machine to another one. I know that the feeling is very ugly, but at least it's mathematically sound and we can understand what it means. But of course, I'm really happy to listen to psychological interpretations of this because I find it really difficult to explain in a social science context. What is the information content? People ask me, why do you look at the internet to measure that? Why don't you ask people what is the information content of this word and the other one? And I say, well, I have no idea what is the information content of any word. I mean, and if I were a layman, I would not even know what the hell are you talking about, you know?
No,
so
I completely agree with your mention of information content. I'm just wondering in how far it tells you something more except the fact that the word is infrequent, which you already knew.
Just by the frequency. I would say that, yes, the frequency contains most of the correlation. We partial out by frequency. So we had partial correlations. So we try to see if this is holding also for frequent classes of the words, and it really still held it. It was still holding. So I would say that there's some additional information in the context and not only in the word frequency. So we might need to think a bit beyond just the occurrence of words and also take into account the context where they appear. So you see that the pictures here are consistent. They're not so different, but when we're looking into the fine-grained statistics, we find that indeed the context adds some information to the frequency of the words, of the positive and negative words. So here I'm showing you, for example, the relation to self-information. Self-information is just a nonlinear transformation of the frequency. If you think about it, it really follows from the fact that positive words are more usual than negative words, that they should contain less information. But we find much stronger correlation and much stronger statistics when we look into this information point of view. So it really adds more to, instead of thinking into a frequentist basis, into thinking of what is more likely to happen, into what is the amount of information or what is the role of a word in the information process. There is something that the words are chosen because of the information content and not just because of their usual to be said.
But I find strange that you seem to have almost a linear, at least a monotonic relationship, where I would expect that the words with a very high valence, either positive or negative, should be less frequent.
And the words with high valence here? No, so this is our finding. I mean, we found that indeed.
Also, very highly positive words are also more frequent.
Yes, I mean, these are 20 beans, and yes, indeed, they were also significantly more frequent than negative words. So,
and the definition of very positive.
This came from this. I explained. These are lexica from word balance. So they were taking they were made some surveys. But yes, I mean, we're validating this with 3 different
Measuring the lexica.
Yes. Okay. Let me go back to that slide. So these are 3 independent lexica in 3 different languages. So they did a good job into having a stable, unbiased sampling of words, in the sense that they are all equally positive and negative in the lexicon, but then they basically failed if they wanted to have equal positive and negative likely words. So they do not represent the same amount of expression because the expression is not balanced. So to some extent there's no purpose on trying to reproduce this in the lexicon. I would say that, I mean, I was also surprised. I would think that it would correlate with the strength of the emotion, as emotions being something expensive to communicate or something risky to say. But it simply happened that the positive emotions are not risky to communicate up to some point.
I would expect that words like this is splendid or brilliant or outstanding would be less common than saying this is good or this is okay or
I mean,
fine.
Yes, do you think there's so much difference in the balance? I mean, I have to say that since we published this, these lexica were only 1,000 words. So I would say that we can spend the whole afternoon finding 1,000 counterexamples. But I have to say that there has been some follow-up research after we published this, and they have validated this with 13,000 words, with a much larger lexicon. Of course, you can argue, was the survey method a correct one or not? To some extent, it was holding the same thing, the same kind of relation for a larger lexicon. So also, up to some extent, you cannot measure the information content of extremely strange words that never happen on the internet. Some kind of scientific terms, they will not appear. So splendid, I think it would, but I don't know, astounding is a bit more difficult to find. So there's always a limit in the data onto measuring these things. But so far here, with 1,000 words, we found something, and then people with more words found something consistent. So far, we think we're not so wrong. I mean, of course, we are not touching the limits of our uncertainty, but at least in the certainty we have, we are quite sure. Yes, I'm trying to understand this relation a bit more, and also especially to understand if there's some sort of step hidden here. If there is some qualitative difference, some kind of, we call it first order phase transition. So there's a point in which everything is very low and then it jumps and it's much higher. So I don't know if this continuum does really exist, or is just some sort of a projection of a frequency of something that happens very likely or very unlikely. So we need to learn more on how these words are used and why.
Your data points that there are clearly not 1,000 on the right-hand side. So
which ones? Here?
Yeah, these are not 1,000 words.
No. I mean, this whole thing are 1,000 words, and each one is 100, basically. Yeah, no, a bit less, 50 words.
Yeah, that's too little to get those really kind of exceptionally good high balances.
I might say so, yes. I mean, at least we will need to use this new lexica. That's why I'm really excited that somebody is listening to us and then try to follow in that direction. Yes. But I found this quite surprising myself. I also thought that there will be additional dimensions that would determine the information content, but also when trying to measure arousal or dominance, we didn't really find much. It was really just the positivity or negativity that makes us use a word, or that gives it a role in our communication, up to correlation that is like 0.4 or something. Of course, it's not everything, but it's something. So if I... Yes.
The title says positive words carry less information.
Yes.
Is it that, or positive words occur less often in a negative environment? In a negative context?
No, we were looking at words in isolation, not n-grams which contain different words. So, in a sense, we're estimating the information content of each word. Yeah. In all the contexts it can appear, but we're not looking at the information contents of pairs of words, for example. So if you have this is nice and horrible, we don't look into such thing because we have no theory. We have no idea what does that mean. So if there is some theory to test such kind of things, we'll be happy to test it on the data, but we are not counting for cross appearance of words, for what will be the mutual information of words. That's actually it's a very nice question. What is the mutual information of positive and negative words, and if one covers the information of the other one, or it's extremely predictable or unpredictable because of it? And that's a good one. I think there are some current works on mutual information between terms. I just recall seeing a couple of days one work that was studying the mutual information of terms in tweets, depending to the words nerd and geek. So it was trying to find out what is the popular concept of a geek and a nerd. And then there was a real difference in mutual information of certain terms. For example, nerd was related to science, algebra, math, and then geek was related to Game of Thrones, and things like that. So there is a way to also understand what is the information content between two words, and then maybe across emotions gives you what is the prevalent emotion. I would like that, yeah, a good one. But I'm just summarizing, but I'll be happy to go back to any slide that you mentioned before. And the idea is that we at least validated the Pollyanna hypothesis in English, German, and Spanish in online expression. Of course, in the real verbal expression of humans, it might be different, it might be even more biased. We don't really know. And we published this in EPJ Data Science last year. It's publicly accessible, so you can also read it from anywhere and also print it and share it with anybody you want. And the question also is like, does this bias exist only in Western cultures? So is it just simply a social norm that we have created to have a positive environment and a collaborative environment and, I don't know, a soup of interaction? Or is simply changing, and then in the end in more Eastern communities, or in other words, we just don't find this kind of expected bias towards positivity? Another question I have is, does it really change across online communities? Can we find some pockets of negativity on the internet while the rest looks stupidly positive? And the most interesting question is, has it changed through history? Is it possible that generations ago we were not so much into positive expression, and this has been created by some sort of process of positivation? And then I'm thinking here of the rise of positive thinking trademark. So this whole ideology that you need to keep a positive thinking attitude to attract success for some sort of hidden rule. Is it possible that this has been created at some point and has been hidden in our language, and then when we go back to the past we don't see this bias? So I don't know to which extent is this really possible, but I know that why I think is empirically testable, and then we can look at Google Books data, for example, at the whole history of, well, the whole history, lots of books in history, and see if this bias existed before or not. I also bring this because these are like my crazy thoughts in the last months, and I will be very happy if you have comments on how feasible you think it is, or if it's conflicting with current theories. I don't know.
That's for sure that the positive thinking is a new trend, but not at all across all domains. For children education, at school, at work, in coaching, management, and everything. So they are teaching you to say things in a positive way, even though the message is not a positive message. So
I don't know if this... Maybe it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. I know this is going to be on the data, and that's why I look for it. And then that's why I'm trying to look into the past and see if this did not exist at some point. I don't know. I can say that this seems to be a trend, but then if you look at Pollyanna hypothesis, it's already since the 60s. I don't know how old is this kind of feeling.
If you think of education on children, and we are going back before the 60s, it was not like that. So there was a change.
Okay.
There was no internet.
No, but there's also a much deeper psychological mechanism, that is the positivity offset. That people tend to be, on average, if nothing special happens, to be more positive feeling than negative feeling. So in that sense, it is normal that if you describe a neutral state of affairs, that you would use more positive than negative sounding words. It's not necessarily a judgment.
That's a good one. Then it would.
Also, you can probably increase it. And for example, I suspect that the American culture tends to exaggerate it and make things more positive than they really are. But I think the neutral, the default position of people is to feel positive.
I think that thought is in line with other empirical research, like in the typical surveys of how do you feel with Palm devices or with surveys online, there was also this bias towards positivity. So we can say that also internally we have this personal bias. So maybe in the end we have to both. Yeah, I think it's interesting to have both factors: one a cultural or trendy one, and another that is more biological or that we need it for survival to be in a positive mode.
But that also ties in with the low information content. If by default you feel slightly positive, then saying that you feel slightly positive is not surprising.
Exactly.
It's when you feel negative that it is surprising and therefore unusual, therefore low frequency, therefore high information content.
And then, okay, basically.
That's the positivity offset and the negativity bias. By default, we want to be positive, but as soon as something negative happens, it attracts the attention precisely because it is unusual and it is potentially dangerous.
I commented on this in the paper. I really was happy to learn all these theories and find that it makes sense on them. The question is, how does this appear online is something we don't know very well. So we see that they contain more information by this measure of information content, but we don't know if people really react stronger to negative content on the internet because we're so used to see negative content in the end. There might be some adjustment.
No, but we are less used to the negative content than we are to the positive content because the positive content is so ubiquitous. It's kind of a background we don't notice it anymore. And you have the bad news bias, which is why the newspapers typically speak about disasters and birds, etc. Because that's the way to attract the attention. If they say things have been going reasonably well with the economy, it's not a news article. But unemployment has been increasing, that's news.
A lot of information nowadays.
But what I found interesting also is that in the anonymous website, then the balance seems to be more or less.
It was a bit more negative, yes. We don't know if because we're using a standard lexicon from normal language and the language there has some sort of hidden negativity that does not really exist. So also the moment comes into it, are these people really feeling a negative emotion or they're just writing it because it's the social norm? So we can never test if a person that is writing something online is actually feeling it, or at least we will need other kinds of research into doing so. So we can only say about how people are using words. So there we can say that people are using negative words more often and hypothesize what is the reason and look for it. But if they really feel negative, it's something that to some point is a limit of this kind of research.
Yeah, but it's a hypothesis.
It's a nice one. I always...
It's reasonable.
Yes, I think that a point is anonymity. So when you're anonymous, you don't have punishment because of being negative. So it might be that there we're able to look at individuals in a artificial freedom in the sense that they do not fear saying not what they feel but whatever they want, or like show themselves the way they are. But then we have other anonymous data sources like the IRC channels, the chats, and there we see this positivity. So it's also not really mapping directly to just the question of anonymity or not. There's a bit more. There is something else, some sort of social norm that is appearing in some communities and not in some others.
I would guess it depends on the length of interactions. If it's very short, then okay, you can say all the negative things. If you know that you will go back to an IRC channel every day, and
the same people, yes.
And then it makes sense to be more positive.
That's a good difference. No, very good one, because it's testable. I mean, we can see basically how long are interactions, or while in 4chan we don't know who is who, in the IRC channels we can say how long they are connected. So we could also test that. Yeah, that's good. I really think that this is different across communities, and there are some exceptions like this. So I don't know if there's creating a different online subculture on the internet that is just simply using words in a different way. It's also possible. Right now we are crawling data on these two, and then we are waiting to have a large measurement like we had from the Google dataset. So yes?
Regarding your last question, can you check this on Google Books?
Exactly. This is my idea. In Google Books, we have there are Google Books since the 15th century, I think, but of course the sampling of books increases towards the 20th century. So also what is the validity of a lexicon when applied to a book from the 17th century is something I would be very careful with. So to some extent it might apply to the 20th century, I don't know, or I will try to be more precautious into looking into such large history. And that there is a large sample of books from the 20th century. So then maybe we can just look at the yearly statistics from only recent history and see if it changes, for example, over generations, if you can see that 3 generations ago it was different as now. I don't know, the data in Google Books is there, and I just don't have the time to do this. I'm looking for collaborators if anybody wants to work on it. But I mean, so far I hope that there is an effect. I'm not sure, but there might be, yeah. So, well, if you want, I can move on to the next topic, that is measuring polarization through Eurovision. That looks like a very profane topic, but I will try to motivate you what I really mean with this. So the motivation for this is a Swiss Science National Foundation project that we just started in April, that is titled The Role of Emotional Interaction in the Polarization of Opinions in Participatory Media. So this paper or this research that I will present is not part of the project, but was a motivation for the project. So the idea is to study during the next 3 years what are the conditions that create polarization of opinions in social media. So we have this question: is social media helping us to find agreements and consensus, or is creating some polarization and unnecessary dissensus? Is this dissensus positive because it creates a wealth of different opinions and a more participative democracy, or at the end it becomes some noise and the only thing that you use for making your decisions is still mass media? So we are asking ourselves all these questions. We ask ourselves, for example, does the spiral of silence exist everywhere on the internet where it doesn't exist? Where this, the spiral of silence is this theory of you try to avoid having negative expression or critical point of view towards an opinion in the beginning of the discussion. It takes longer for somebody to be able to stand up and say, this is wrong, or this is the elephant in the middle of the room. And what are the more effective political campaigns? So in the sense that maybe can politicians play with this and make more efficient campaigns that spread online, that they can tap into this emotional behavior to have something more efficient in terms of mobilization? Are these different political cultures different, and they're using the online medium in a different way? In this project, we are not looking into predicting elections from online media, because we don't really believe it can really be done. We just want to see how different political aligned communities are using the online medium and for which reason are they doing so, but not really into trying to predict the election. We think that the election has to take place anyway. We don't want to predict it. And the question that I'm asking here is, what is the impact of the euro debt crisis on the culture and opinions of European countries? Can we measure this some way? I mean, is there a way that is not the typical European service and some digital trace of behavior of the European citizens in the way they do their daily life? And surprisingly enough, a nice source for international data is the Eurovision Song Contest. So I'm here in Europe. I know that probably you understand what I'm talking about, but it's an annual song competition among the song countries in the European Broadcasting Union. And it's surprising that it's the most viewed non-sport event in the world every year. So only football matches are outperforming the Eurovision Song Contest. 125 million viewers were the amount of viewers in 2012. So we're talking about something that is happening at a very large scale in Europe. In general, the research in Eurovision does not seem to be very serious. It's something that is done by students for fun. But to some point, they are talking about a really massive data set, that a really something that can really be used to measure a yearly feeling of Europe. So the basic rules is that all participants vote, but only some of them compete, and each participant assigns votes according to the performance of each other country from 1 to 12 since 1975, and then some countries since 1997 started to decide the votes based on SMS, votes on telephone calls. Currently it's based on 50% a professional jury, so some people that have some knowledge of music according to some organization. And then the other 50% is just the popularity on these SMS votes. So the idea is to measure what is the relation in between European countries based on this simultaneous assessment of something that is so trivial as a song. So the point is that you think, how am I going to measure anything based on the song? It's just a song contest, it's not a European popularity contest. So the question of trying to interpret Eurovision results is called in the literature Eurovisephology. So psephology is the science of interpreting election results, and they just appended the Eurovision Eurovisephology part of it. Okay, I don't really care about the previous literature on this particular thing, because they were just simply trying to look into something on the data. So for example, there was an online predictor made by Google that predicted correctly the winner in 2009 and 2010 based on the search logs of people in each country. So if from France they were searching for the German participant, they were inducing that they were more likely to vote for the German participant. And this worked twice. It happened that in 2011 it was an epic fail because people adapted to it, and then they were starting to search for their own country in Google as if it was some sort of way to vote or to push your country into the search results. So there was a system adaptation. They made a very nice prediction tool that worked perfectly fine in the first time when nobody really cared. Then it worked for a second time, so then everybody started believing it, and then the system adapted and destroyed the prediction tool itself. So then they failed completely, I think, in 2011, and they didn't even try in 2012 anymore because it was also jeopardizing their own tool that is the Google search engine, and this will be really bad for their own business just because of a joke of Eurovision. So I like it because it's this example of a system adaptation to the research itself, and that's why sometimes our own predictors, they are not really working anymore as soon as we discover them. So the question is that also there are some qualitative studies on what is the role of culture in Eurovision, and I like this quotation from a Balkan music band that says, "I'm sick of being European just on Eurosong." So to some extent they say that we're all Europeans for one day in Eurovision and we're all together, and up to some point this creates some reaction, some negative reaction of the people listening to it because they know that everything is a farce up to some point. It's only staying for one day. So the idea was to try to subtract the artistic component of the contest and just look into the politics. In general, everybody tells you that Eurovision is not about the songs, and then horrible songs are winning just because of some politics in between the countries, that the artistic component is not really telling you anything. So our idea is to try to measure this political state or this kind of cultural relation between the countries despite of the artistic component, and have a macroscope of the state of the Union in Europe. In the sense that if we can measure the effects of the euro crisis in the market and its capital through all these economic indicators, can we measure the effect of the crisis in the society and its culture by such a profane data source like the Eurovision Song Contest? So what we came up with is this measure of the voting bias, or the Fresnel-Foe coefficient. So here we have the Fresnel-Foe coefficient from country B to country C, voting country B to competing country C, and what we are doing is that we take the votes, the number of points that country B gave to country C, and we are correcting for the final score of the competing country. So basically here we are measuring how much overvoting or undervoting is a country towards another. In a sense that sometimes if you see that the country gives 12 points to another one, this doesn't tell you anything. It tells you that they gave 12 points when nobody else gave any point. So the signal is basically a perturbation of what will be the mean. Here we're just looking at what will be the expected value if we had an unbiased contest versus the given value that appear on the data. So here I show two examples. In the first one, there's this Fresnel-Foe coefficient between Cyprus and Greece since 2002, and we find that this is very much above 0 and also usually close to 1. So there's this unconditionality that they are giving 12 to each other all the time, regardless of whatever other country says. And the opposite case can be seen between Norway and Greece. So in general, they vote each other below 0, or they try to avoid voting each other. And what is the reason why Norway and Greece? Do they have any problem? Do they fight somehow? Then our whole point of view and the real motivation for this was cultural differences. It might just happen that people from Norway do not like the type of music that is made in Greece, and from Greece they don't really care about what is made in Norway, and that is why they are simply avoiding to vote each other. There's simply a distance between them. So we tried to validate such concept, and we took the dimensions, cultural dimensions from Hofstede. So there we have these 4 dimensions of power, distance, individualism, masculinity, and risk aversion, and we have them for some European countries, not for all of them. So then in this space we can define a cultural distance as basically a Hamming distance in between these 4 dimensions. So here I'm showing the mean historical Fresnel-Foe coefficient, so I'm just aggregating all the contest results between couples of countries. Each couple of countries 1 point, and then where I'm measuring the cultural distance based on this whole study by Hofstede. And well, we find that indeed there is a negative relation, of course a very sparse one, but countries that are closer culturally, they tend to have higher Fresnel-Foe coefficient, or they really tend to vote each other in Eurovision. So this whole concept of trying to measure culture through the Fresnel-Foe coefficient at least is not crazy. I mean, it's a bit supported by the data. There might be many other factors that are driving it, but culture seems to be one of them. The point is also how does this change over time, because we don't have only the mean Fresnel-Foe coefficient over time, but now we can look at how this develops over time and see and try to measure this state of cultural relations between European countries over the years. So the point is to try to measure how is this macroscope of friend or foe coefficient across European countries with the crisis. And as a reaction to our preprint, Philip Ball in Nature News hypothesized that unfortunate countries seem to cluster together in the network as if huddling for consolation. So like Southern Europe were voting for each other more than to other countries because they were feeling the victims or something. Yeah. So then I said, okay, let's quantify this. No, I took the modularity on the votes. So this is the Newman's weighted modularity for only positive votes. And then I calculated the modularity in the friend or foe coefficient network. So this is a positive negative network. So then we have a corrected modularity metric that tries to find communities that have very strong positive links within the community and negative links across the community. So if countries are really huddling each other in little communities, they should map here and create higher modularity in the years in which this maps to the crisis. But then I also added myself in the beginning a measure of polarization. This was the real motivation. Can we measure the standard deviation of the votes in the friend or foe coefficient to simply find how biased is the contest on how much unfair our people are because of something that is changing this voting pattern? So here I'm showing the time series of modularity both in the votes network in white and in the friend or foe network in black for countries in the EU15. So the EU15 is smaller, then we know what's going on, and luckily we have only an amount of participating countries between 11 and 14, so we can find exact modularity. If you know a bit of the literature on modularity, finding the division of nodes that define the highest modularity is an NP hard problem. So it takes an extremely amount of computation to find what is the real modularity of a network. But because the network of countries in the EU15 is small enough, we can run a massive simulation, a massive analysis inside our computer clusters and find what is the exact maximum modularity of the networks. So what we find is that when we try to find some trend of modularity, we find a peak here in 2007 for some reason, and there's no real increase of modularity. This huddling for consolation hypothesis, we can really reject it. We cannot see that in the years of the crisis, there is a more clusterization of countries voting each other. But what we see is that there's a peak on polarization, or at least the biases seem to be more present in the EU15 countries. So the question is this peak in 2010 and 2011 some indicator of the Euro crisis? In particular, this looks like, I thought I had okay, I wanted to show this one first. These are two examples of EU15 countries voting in Eurovision, one with low polarization in 2007 and one with high polarization in 2010. So you can see that in 2007, the strength and the depth of all these blue links or positive friend or foe links was much more sparse and less strong than in 2010 when there was a lot of positive and negative friend or foe coefficients. So this happens when the countries are very biased. They are trying to avoid to vote each other, or they are shifting their voting patterns for some reason. They're simply disagreeing more with the result of the contest. And then by looking into the time series of polarization, we wanted to validate if this really means anything of the economy or the state of Europe. So we took the mean interest rate of the sovereign bonds of European 15 countries. I know this sounds crazy, but we know. So then we took, we see, this is the beginning of the usage of euro as a physical currency. Then in black, we have the time series of this mean interest rate. So of course, when it's high, it means that there's a lot of distrust and nobody wants to give money to European countries. When it's low, everybody's happy and then they all believe in Europe. So in blue, we have the polarization in Eurovision, and in green, I just marked the bailouts from the European Bank and the International Monetary Fund because, well, they are significant moments for our analysis. So we see that, in the beginning, the euro was created, the interest rates were going down, everybody was believing a lot in the European dream, the polarization was very low, then things started to go strange, and already in 2010, because we knew already that something was going wrong in Greece, Italy, Spain, and so on, the polarization went up, and actually the economy took a bit longer to act the same way. So similarly, in 2011, it went even above the polarization, and also we knew that the economy went a bit worse. And then surprisingly, all these measures from the European Union seem to have had a positive effect in the mood of the European countries, and the polarization went down again. And of course, we know that the interest rate has also gone down, but not other indicators. So at least with this indicator, that is the only one I tried, I promise. It seems to be a correlation, or at least we find that there is some sort of I would not say a causation. I mean, only a fool would think that the Eurovision Song Contest influences the economy. But at least we can say that there are maybe both ways to look into the same phenomenon. You can talk about how the economy is changing according to the society and how the voting patterns in Eurovision are also reacting to this. And it might be
that we would vote these signals of distrust between European countries. They feel more like we can trust all the others, or no, we are being treated differently, we can't trust the others. Then there would be more polarization, and there would also be more problems with the banks because they don't trust lending to each other.
Yeah, yes. Somehow, if the banks are following what people feel, or the mass media, or there are 1,000 confounds in this analysis, but still there's a lot of plausible confounds that are making a consistent approach. So up to some point, maybe Eurovision has been an early warning of what is happening with the crisis somehow. So we just simply try to validate this a little bit. I mean, we calculated the correlation between the lagged mean interest rate and the polarization in Eurovision. So we have higher frequency for the interest rate, we have a monthly time series, and for Eurovision we have only a yearly event. So we can have a lagged measure of this correlation. So what we found is that in this particular instant of Eurovision, it didn't really correlate with this mean interest rate, but up to 5 to 7 months later, this correlation was maximum. So if you notice, this time series here was shifted to some extent. It looks like polarization moves before the mean interest rate, and here we quantify what is this before. So there's a strong correlation, and here I'm showing the scatter plot of the mean interest rate 7 months after the polarization of Eurovision, which is driven by these two outliers, by these two examples of 2010 and 2011. So somehow you cannot really say about what is the response of Eurovision to the crisis before the crisis ever happened. But when we got these 2 points of what is happening in the crisis, we could see that indeed there is some relation between them. I was extremely, I would not believe this. I tried myself as much as I could to validate these measures. I took all the metrics I took, metrics at the level of EU15, metrics at the level of the whole Europe. I made Bonferroni corrections for all of them to try to see how crazy I was, and really, seriously, the polarization in the EU15 was still significant with the mean interest rate. So up to some point, we are tapping into something that we can look into biases of human behavior in like large aggregated scale and find similar movements as we find in other aggregated scales, like what is the interest rate of the European countries. So, yeah?
You used always Hofstede as a reference for
and that was
cultural distance.
Yes.
But it could be that the cultural distance is related to the class you belong in this crisis. I belong in the class it's a crisis, I belong in the class it's the Herrenvolk. It's something like that. So it could be another correlation that actually plays. And then by accident, the Latin countries are closer, and by accident, the northern countries are closer. So it's maybe not the cultural distance, it's maybe more the psychological class you belong to.
I think that maybe what we see is that the effect of the cultural distance is just stronger during the crisis. So people are avoiding to vote the countries that are different while we're in this state of unsafety.
This country was an exception, maybe, because this country went to belong to the bad ones, and suddenly we were the good ones.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see.
In this, this is why I also looked into this modularity. So I will not say that the network is really separable. I will say that this polarization is present everywhere. Yeah. So there's just a collective bias happening, and it does not happen that the southern countries are voting each other stronger than they usually do. They just simply happen to vote differently to other countries in general. Yeah. So I would say that the validation with Hofstede was just to say that the French-Foy coefficient says something about culture, at least at some point in time, and now maybe what we are looking is into the change of culture or the change of the expression of culture.
Show the definition of polarization.
Here, it's just the standard deviation of the French-Foy coefficients. So if everybody agrees and votes exactly to the same country, then the polarization will be 0. If everybody votes homogeneously and the contest is a perfect one, then there will be no biases. When the biases are really strong, then this polarization increases. And if everyone votes differently, if they could vote to themselves, then the polarization will be maximum.
Is the degree to which
of the bias? Yeah, which is this one. How much their vote differs from the total. So if you think this is a first order bias and then we're measuring a second order bias, or like how is the strength of the individual biases across a couple of countries.
Or maybe I think you could check also is to take only the votes from the public and not from the jury.
Yes.
The jury, we would expect it to be more objective.
I wanted to do that, and such data was only released in 2009. Since 2009, 2010 and so on, there's no data on the split between the jury and the countries, only the aggregated, but not in between countries, because apparently the jury is behaving very differently. So I agree that there is something going on. The point is that, is the jury also biased? I mean, there's also a possibility. Since years before there was these SMS votes, there was also known to have these relations, and we also find French coefficients before SMS votes. I would say that the best quality data is the one that did not combine these two. That is, since 2004 until 2009, it was only SMSs and televotes. But then the crisis didn't start yet. So then the question is like, is this happening because they are mixing the jury votes and the SMS votes? And we see that this polarization happens for some time and then relaxes. So we can also find examples of contests in which there's the combination of both and the polarization is the same as before when there was only SMS votes. So we have analyzed this deeper also. I'm not showing it here, but we made an agent-based simulation to try to measure what is the bias created by the rules of the contest, and if it's because of this constraint that you give votes only from 1 to 12 and you cannot give negative votes or you cannot give fractional votes. And we still found that there is some biases present on that we can measure in the French coefficient. So it's not a construct of the data itself, there is something that is changing in Europe and it just simply happens to be consistently moving with the European economy. So okay, going back to where I was, that is here, yes. I presented this already in September last year in a conference here in Brussels where I met Francis. There was a special issue in advances in complex systems. So I submitted this there and it was just recently accepted, so it will appear soon. And there's a preprint in the archive that is very close to the final version that will appear in the journal, so you can already read about this. And it was surprising that in 2013, I just calculated this polarization a couple of weeks ago, and I found that the result is 0.23. So it suggests that the mean interest rate will stay the same. If this correlation is the same, I will not buy credit default swaps right now. It doesn't seem to be the right moment, just for your information. Yes, I mean, of course, this is the worst prediction I could get. I mean, these things stay the same. Thank you. It attracted a bit of attention. In Nature News, they already picked the first version of our preprint and they mentioned Eurovision voting shows strain of economic crisis. So yes, I mean, I agree that there's a bit of a leftover, but still the real method or mechanism how this emerges is something we don't know. And there's no way, I mean, at least I could not really hypothesize how it is really created. We need a much more wider multidisciplinary scope to know what is really the reason why we see these two relations, or if it's just something totally nonsense. I really keep the question open. So my further question is if we can predict this through social media, given the fact that Eurovision is losing audience and every year less countries can go because it's extremely expensive, can we create another macroscope that we apply in social media to measure the state of the European Union? So I have a data set of the views for the videos in 2012 per country, so what is the audience of each video in each country, but this data is not available anymore in YouTube, so I will try to understand is by online behavior or by video views in YouTube, we could understand or predict what is going to be Eurovision, and then up to some point forget about Eurovision and just do this online, kind of have a real-time assessment of what is the relation between European countries. Might be through video views or through website visits, tweets, etc. So yeah, this was my last slide on this topic, so if you want we can talk about it. Yes?
Did you have some discussion with the organizers?
Eurovision? No.
No. Really interesting.
I think they don't care about this. I don't know. Yeah, sure. It's a business, and if it's profitable, they do it, and if it's not, they don't. So, yeah, I don't think.
Private. It's a private organization.
I don't think so. Well, I don't know if the European Broadcasting Union is private, but at least the local TVs are usually publicly owned. So I don't really know. I mean, myself, I'm not so fundamentally interested in Eurovision. So I didn't contact them. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we received some journalists asking questions, and they were asking me absurd things like, can you predict who is going to win in 2013? Or do you think they will not vote to Germany because of all these things? And I said, read my paper. I didn't talk about any of that. You know,
There's a whole sociological aspect to it.
no, yes. I mean, I'm trying to say that is there's something. Yeah, they're very far phenomena, but they are talking about the same thing. That is just an aggregate of individuals. So yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know. I try not to think I'm crazy, but of course I need other people to validate this, to take other data sets, or to simply formulate hypotheses, because I don't know. I have no way to hypothesize the mechanism that connects both. I mean, does this happen that you don't want to invest in sovereign bonds when you found that the country does not perform well in Eurovision? Of course not. I mean, probably simply happens that at the same time you don't want to vote for them, and this is the same as putting money in the sovereign bond. But in general, we know that the investment in such things is not happening in the individuals of the society. It's happening at a higher level in the banks or in the hedge funds.
Actors are also different. The actors
yes.
who make the price of the bonds are not the same as the actors
who vote in Eurovision.
Voting goes on perception. The stock market goes on perception. And here you have the perception first and the bonds that follow later on.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to just to fear. When there is a crisis, you just fear from others and you retract, and that's why you see the polarization. So you can understand it.
You should correlate it with the economic index that every country has on positiveness and negativeness, on perspective. Because every country has a monthly economic perspective, where it's like, are people optimistic or negative or pessimistic? And I think that's a correlation.
Like the prospect of each country of the economy.
And also see whether there are clusters, whether you have
I didn't try much. I don't know if there are correlations at the individual country level. So here I'm just looking at the polarization of the whole EU15.
Polarization in this prospects.
Yes, okay.
You are more positive-minded in Germany now than you are when you live in Greece. And the economic indicator is probably -10 or +10.
Okay. Yeah.
Numbers.
That's a good one. Okay. Yeah, I will take it into account. I also want to mix this with other surveys and other economic indicators to some point. I don't know. I mean, the interest rate, I took it because it's what I'm hearing in the news all the time. So there might be other things. I didn't want to take stock market indices because the monthly index does not mean anything. But I thought that the bonds was lower.
Interesting is to see here you're seeing when there's a crisis coming up. But what is going on when it goes down, and to see if again the Eurovision is anticipating it.
If it's so if the economy does not go to another cascade of defaults in 7 months, then maybe this measure was right. I mean, I don't really know. Yes. The European Commission should pay me for this. Yes.
Please go to the bank.
Yes.
Did you establish a correlation between the polarization and the number of people looking at the Eurovision?
At the contest, I don't know if I have those statistics. I just had like an approximation from the Wikipedia page, so it might be somewhere. Yeah, I don't really know what is the audience.
Going down?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it depends a lot on the countries. On different countries, yeah, no idea. I mean, in general, it's about this 120 million, and then the statistics are probably known later.
I think
It's a really lot of people.
To quote you, it's all politics.
Yes. Yes. I think the audience might be going down because, I mean, my personal experience is that it's extremely boring. I mean, after they play, then they spend like an hour and a half voting, and then you spend an hour and a half of people saying country names and numbers. Yeah. And then I will expect people just disconnect there and then join later to see who is going to win. And I watched it this year for the first time after 5 years ago, and I was super bored. I also one thing that people tell me is that it's not a very serious thing to vote for Eurovision. You just follow your stupid feelings at a point. Actually, I would say that at the moment of voting, most of the audience is drunk, because it's basically a party, and then people really watch this at parties, and they go to a bar and they watch Eurovision all together. So to some point I would say that here we're measuring a very subjective bias, you know. I think we're just aggregating a lot of things that people don't care about, and then it's just revealing something.
It's really a tragedy, because it's the image of Europe.
Yeah.
Boring. Europe is boring.
Boring. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my feeling always was that it's full of very funny acts, and then people doing very extravagant things. And this year I watched it, and it was just normal songs, like love songs or sad songs. And I don't know, maybe simply I'm older. I don't know if I don't like it anymore. But yes, I'm trying to move away from Eurovision, just think at this in a broader context, in something that is more testable than just such long range correlation, and to look into the online medium because it's the one I'm more experienced with. So, well, if you allow me to go on, I will talk now about this concept of social resilience and what is the autopsy of Friendster. That is also quite an interesting topic. That is really my latest publication that is on the archive. So the question was, when social networks go to hell? So what happens when one of these huge flops of a lot of users simply drive away from an online social network? So we know that Facebook is really big and is really successful, but we have a history of other social networks that they just became deserts of people without any activity. This research was inspired by a video from the Onion News Network, that is a satirical channel of news in YouTube, that was describing internet archaeology. And it was presenting an internet archaeologist that was showing the discovery of finding the long-lost Friendster community. So a place on the internet that nobody had been for a long time, which was like a year in the video. So this also shows a bit this fast pace of the internet society. Something that is not in for 1 year is already old and about to disappear. So I define myself, the internet archaeology, as the analysis of the non-written traces of a disappeared society, aiming at the understanding it worked and the reasons for its demise. So it's the same as normal archaeology. You just look at non-written traces from the life of people in the past. The difference is that the time scale on the internet is completely different as the time scale on human societies. The point is that we are now starting to talk about this digital blackout. There's a lot of information that is disappearing on the internet because there's no more interest on it, or it's not part of it because it's just so large. So Friendster was one of those communities, and in 2011 was discontinued. And they were going to erase all the information that was contained there, all the profiles from 120 million users that were using Friendster. So in a sense, I'm using here some examples of what was the opinion of Friendster that are taken from this video. So for example, millions of profiles were left utterly untouched since its collapse. So really people left, especially a lot of Americans in 2004, stopped using it, and then all the data was left there. There was not so much concern about privacy at that time, so there was a lot of private pictures that were publicly available. Users prized photos of themselves drinking, so there's really these lots of private information, and Friendster was a primitive society lacking video comments or status updates. So also there's this concept that really everything goes so fast, and in technology is so fast that something that was used a lot in 2005 is something extremely old for the internet society. So what we took is a data set from the Internet Archive. Here I have the statistics, in which we are trying to measure the concept of social resilience. So social resilience, we borrow this definition from environmental sociology that says that resilience is the ability of a community to withstand external stresses, disturbances, or environmental changes. So you have something that disturbs the community. In general, in environmental science is thought as a hurricane or a flooding or something like that. But what could be the equivalent of a catastrophe in the online world? What can try to put some force into the link or the society of these people? And we try to compare the Friendster data that we had with other 4 more successful or also failed online communities. So the most striking one was Friendster because we had the full social network of 117 million users that was crawled by the Internet Archive right before it was discontinued. So this data is publicly available. Creative Commons is just a huge and a big mess. So it took some effort to do some statistics, especially because we were looking at some aggregated statistics of the social network that require some computation. So we can say that we are doing the autopsy of Friendster because we have the corpse on top of our table and we are analyzing with it as much as we want. And from the other communities, we're doing a biopsy because we have a small sample of users that were crawled in previous research that did not mind that you were taking these. You got a bit of data from them with their consent. And then we're talking still about quite large data sets. At least from Facebook and ORCAD, we have 3 million users, and from MySpace, only 100,000. From LiveJournal is also pretty much a complete data set of 5 million users. So the idea is to try to compare Friendster as a huge failure with the other online communities and see if we can measure and compare resilience across communities.
What do the links mean?
They're friendship links, like Facebook. You request a friendship and then they become your friends. Yes, the only exception is LiveJournal. LiveJournal was a blog community, still used. So then you follow somebody in the blog and then somebody follows you. So there is directed, so we are taking only the undirected by bidirectional relations. This is because in general, LiveJournal was used to validate measures of spreading and so on. For example, in Nature Physics, it was used. So we have it like a kind of a gold standard to compare with. So maybe LiveJournal is a bit categorically different to the other four, but still a social network of people communicating with each other. And if you don't have any friends making interesting blogs, probably you don't do anything anymore. In a sense, LiveJournal is very similar to now Tumblr, the one was bought for 1.1 billion by Yahoo. So there's also a type of online community that is still very used, but this one is going in decline. So our concept of resilience is very linked to the degree distributions. First, we thought if we have a power law degree distribution, we know from statistical physics that there might be a virus, some sort of infection of a negative opinion that percolates on the community and destroys it just because of its degree distribution. So we wanted to test this power law hypothesis in all these datasets that we have, the 5 here and then all the 5 together. And then we just simply made a very robust statistical test to assess if they were really following a power law distribution or not. So here I just showing the probability density functions, and in red what will be the power law fits on the tails. And we find that for all the 5 datasets we can reject the power law hypothesis. So if you see here where I'm showing only the bit of the red line because the fit will be ignoring all the head of the distribution, like the average normal standard user will not be following this power law distribution, which was reported in a lot of previous research. Actually, there are lots of communities that are all the time claiming to find power law degree distributions in social networks, and at least we're saying, well, I'm not sure, but at least in these 5 ones we find that they are not power law distributed, that they have a lot of constraints of the maximum amount of friends you can have, the recommendation mechanism of friends shapes it in a certain way. So we will never say after this analysis that they follow a power law distribution, not at all. So we need another way to look into the social network to assess what is the possible spreading mechanism. And our idea was to look into cascades of users leaving the network or the decomposition of the network. So here I'm showing an example of a network. Up here from A to B is what happens if you remove all the nodes that have 2 or less friends. So then you will lose all the nodes that become black, and all the ones that are still white will be still in the community. This will be the degree approach. Simply all the users that do not have enough friends will leave. But you might think that there might be following cascades. After all the users that had less than 3 friends left, then maybe other users don't have any friends anymore and they also leave. So this basically creates a cascade of users leaving until there's only a tightly connected core staying in the network. So in a sense, we're modeling this as a rational process. You are a user of a social network. You have a cost of using this network, which is basically your time of using the network, your learning into how to deal with all the different features that you have, and you have a benefit that here we assume is proportional to the amount of friends you have. You have a lot of friends in the network, you have this network effect that is making you stay because you can interact with a lot of people. So if you have 10 friends, you are supposed to enjoy more than if you have only 5 friends. So the idea is that this is modeling the solution of the Nash equilibrium of a game in which you will leave if you don't have enough friends. And this maps to what is known as the K-core decomposition, or the K-cell. This is already a known measure from graph theory that is making us measure what is the amount of remaining users under a certain condition of cost-to-benefit ratio. So the idea is that this cost-to-benefit ratio is defining the environment. Or if you are changing something, you are changing this cost-to-benefit ratio and triggering these cascades of users leaving. So if you change, for example, if you change the interface, if you change the way information flows, if it doesn't work for some days and it's extremely costly to use it, or if there's a better alternative, this ratio changes and it creates these cascades. So by looking into the K-core decomposition, we can compare the different online networks. So here I'm showing with different colors the amount of nodes with each coreness number, or how resilient they will be in the network, how bad has to be the environment for them to live. And in yellow I have Friendster, in green LiveJournal, and the dashed lines are for the biopsies or the partial data sets. So what we find is that the surviving community for Friendster, at least in the same conditions as compared to the other data sets, will be larger. So here basically in the horizontal scale you have conditions. One means the perfect condition, it's really easy to use, everybody gets a lot of benefit, nobody leaves the network ever. But if the conditions start getting worse, more users leave, and this line is telling you how many users will remain under this assumption of rationality. So what we see is that, for example,
It's based on the degree distribution.
it's based more than the degree, it's based on the K-core decomposition. So this cascade here,
On the structure of the network.
Only on the social network. Yeah, it does not have anything else. It's just a way the social network is connecting the environment in terms of cost to benefit ratio with the amount of users that will remain under such environment. And we are doing this through the topology. So what we find is that at least the topology of Friendster seem more resilient than, for example, LiveJournal that still survive, or even Facebook nowadays that is much lower here. So basically what we're finding is that the topology of Friendster seem to be very resilient and still had this cascade of users leaving. So maybe the change in the environment was really wrong. I mean, what we can say here is that the topology does not explain everything. You need another thing that is related to the behavior, related to the decision of the users to model what's happening. It's not that they come and they say, I have 1 billion users and 32 billion links. That's not enough. Even if you analyze these links and you say that they're in a very resilient structure, it's still not enough. Still, you need something else that is linked to the individual decisions of the users, and we need to look into how this cost and benefit correlate with a user. What is the real gain that an individual user gets from the online community, and not just in stupid, absurd, large-scale statistics that don't really explain the history. Yet this might not be everything, but I was trying to validate this a bit with the collapse of Friendster. So here I'm showing with these squares the amount of active users estimated by the Google search for Friendster. So if you have, for example, Chrome or Firefox and you just search for Friendster, it makes a query for Google, a search, and then you get it. So the point is that as I don't know exactly the amount of active users that there were, I can proxy this by just looking at the Google search trend. And in red, I'm just showing a simulation of a large cascade in which the cost to benefit ratio is basically changing at a certain rate. So we find that at some point here, there was 78% of the volume was present, that was 52 million users. And then we took another point here in 2010 when through Wikipedia, we know that there were 10 million users remaining. So by fitting these 2 points and just looking into the topology, we find that the topology explains a cascade that basically, I mean, this has an R-square of like 98. So it explains that there was this large cascade and it just was destroyed in a massive cascade that made all the users leave to start using other networks. Yet what all Americans tell me is that, well, if you ever use Friendster, you will see that in 2009 nobody was using it anymore. But then nobody in the US was using it anymore, but it became very famous in Southeast Asia. And it had like 60 million profiles in Southeast Asia that were most of these 51s. So this happened, that was a cascade among non-Western people that are always in the service, and among some other people that were just stopping to use a network that they adopted for some reason. Here in the inset, I'm showing the evolution of the amount of nodes that have a coreness or that are in the periphery, a coreness below 6. So this is telling me among the users that join at a certain point, because I only know the sequence, I don't know the date, how many users are in the periphery, or what is the likelihood for a user not to be well connected and be likely to leave. And I found this peak here around 20 million. So this was the American community or American adaptation of Friendster that was starting to use it, and then the sub-community was kind of disconnected, started to have a lot of users that didn't really get introduced in the network. And then it had like a smaller cascade, and the cascade that I'm watching here is this one, the last one, that is just the lot of South Asian users that are moving for Facebook instead of Friendster. So I would say that this is a very crude validation of our model. I mean, we just simply see that we can model a huge cascade in the model, and then we can also see it on the data. Thank you. I mean, there are a million models like this that could reproduce such a cascade, but at least it shows that we are not totally wrong. At least it is consistent with the data that we are seeing, and what we need to know now is what is the precise function that makes a user leave a social network or stay. What is the increase of this cost-to-benefit ratio? And this links me to one of my limitations. So these are the conclusions and further research, and I think that in game theory you have this objective function, or you have something that is telling you how good is a situation for you. I think it might not be precisely convex, it can be concave. There's a point in which it starts going down. You have too many friends and the information that you receive is too bad. So we cannot say that the benefit of a user increases with amount of friends. We can say that there's an amount of friends that is an information overload already and it starts decreasing. And this is what we are trying to measure now. It might happen that an online social network might ripple from inside because it's too successful, or it has too many people having too many friends that they don't really care about anymore, and it's good if people start disconnecting because they don't find any kind of profit on the connections, and the usage of the network is better if they don't have these links. So we have the preprint of this in the archive sometime in February, and then it was mentioned in Wired, and how a social network dies. So we look at how it dies, but not why. I mean, we hypothesize why because of this cost-to-benefit ratio. And the idea is that in the end, we just devised a method to measure the impact of the changes in the platform on the user base of the network, or how many users will still use it. And we found that this topology does not explain the failures, and we could simulate a large cascade in Friendster. Then also the point is, how does this extend to other types of online communities? For example, the directional ones, like if you have Twitter or Instagram, you have a reputation mechanism of some users are followed by many, many users, which will not happen in a normal social network. So maybe there the functionality is completely different, and you have different kinds of benefit, one coming from reputation and one coming from information from your friends. And also what is this effect of some kind of concave objective functions, or the limitations of our own model that might explain other types of cascades of user leaving the network. And just as a summary, I present here work on my last 3 papers. One was on this bias of positive emotional expression. So I found that the information content decreases with valence in English, German, and Spanish. Then I just presented you this analysis of polarization in Eurovision and how it changes with the economy. So there's negative correlation between the friend or foe coefficient and the cultural distance. That was kind of my homemade validation of this metric. And then third, this topology link between Friendster and its demise, and just trying to find that a more resilient, at least in the paper, social network does not mean that you will have a more successful online community. You need some other ingredients. And that's all so far. Thanks for listening, and we have discussion. No?
In terms of the last one, topology, it kind of confirms my general impression that especially physicists who like to work with networks tend to pay too much attention to topology. It very much depends on what does a link mean. The fact that there is a link does not necessarily mean that those people have some kind of a real connection. Mm-hmm. A links is a very reductionist view of what an organization is, and if you just start counting the number of links in different places and you play with topology, sometimes you find correlation, but most of the time I don't think you will find
yeah.
Because they are such a kind of caricatural view of what the community is.
I mean, I would say that still links can have a weight, and they might be heterogeneous somehow. So I'm in the middle ground between the physicists and the ones that criticize the physicists, So I also think that the weight is not enough. I mean, here we have a similarity between users, and then you find relevant someone, and this might not map to one single dimension. So yeah, I also think that is too simplistic, and it requires more on the dynamics of the users. Yes?
And what are the hypotheses to explain why Friendster collapsed? Because the cost benefit.
No, what we can say here is that there was a big change in the cost to benefit ratio. That's the message. What is really? I mean, it coincides a bit with a change of user interface and some technological problems that they had, that it was unavailable in certain countries and people could not log in and so on. So yeah, there's some coincidence. I mean, I don't really know the history of Friendster so much, and I just used it because I had this data and so on, and I could measure it. But I think that it makes sense, at least this cascade of users leaving. Now the question if a user really leaves because of its position in the network is something to validate, but at least our indications is that it makes sense. But it's true that there are also other networks which introduce these changes. For example, everybody's so concerned that Facebook will change the interface and people will get angry and so on, and still it doesn't collapse. It doesn't have such a strong change as happening in Friendster. And I think it's because here what we are modeling is a change of a variable that is collective, of a macroscopic variable, as if it's the same for everyone. But if you notice, Facebook is implementing the changes slowly among the users. There are bases of users that they are changed in a month, and then other users are changed even a year later. So somehow they are dampening this cascade by trying to decouple users by having this kind of time interval between them. And that I like that a lot because it maps to my original education, that I'm a theoretical computer scientist, and then the solution for finding a minimum cascade or a perfect ordering of the users to change will be the coloring of the graph. And then the graph coloring is an extremely difficult problem and very nice to try to explore. So I don't know if anybody has ever tried to find coloring of social networks because it wasn't relevant at all, but now might be just for this application. Sorry that I talk a lot. I want to listen to your questions.
I can maybe share something on positive and negative. You used it. I'm looking at data a lot as well, but it's more from a change perspective. And it's more in the context of business. And we also look at the data as positive and negative. But we use very different definitions. And there's one which is based on language and behavior analysis, where I don't know whether you know that, but that's like the way people talk. So I could talk about the dog, or I could talk about business or a customer. Is the way I talk about it will tell you whether you are goal-oriented or problem-oriented. So positively looking forward or negatively looking at the problem. And it's pure scientific. You can actually look at that. I always say I take a yogurt every day because it keeps me healthy, or I take a yogurt every day. I want to have two problems. One is problem-oriented and the other is goal-oriented. And it's just, it could be yogurt, it could be anything. So that's a way to look at language. Positive and negative. The other one is what we call EDC, is whether you could say we have a problem, or we could say we have to address this. But then it's the content, that's the same matter. And then you can look at the content as well. And you look at the content, are people talking about a solution? We should do this to address that problem, or we have a problem. In there you look at the content. So one is the language structure. You can look positive and negative. You can look positive and negative on the content. And you look positive and negatively on the
semantics
of the word in the context.
Exactly.
Yeah? So it's different layers.
I look only in the semantics of the individual word, but there you will have something larger.
It's contextual. And it's linguistic.
How do you measure this? You have some automatic tool that looks for. Yeah. That's why we use that. Because I mean that's why we have them here. I don't know. Wait, sorry that I go back so much, but in these histograms here, well, you cannot see it, but here we're having, I don't know, orders of tens of millions of messages. So then you can have a lot, but then we have them classified. Then we can get the classification of all of them and look up for some statistics that were unthinkable before, especially regarding complex phenomena that we look at the tail at the strangest thing. But if there's in general, I try to have only automatic techniques, but also developing automatic techniques is something we can do. So I don't know. I mean, of course, linguists know much more than me, but they always say that if you phrase a problem, that's already the solution, at least in computer science, and you already have the way to solve it. There's always some statistical support vector machine that gives you a quality.
I work with the Antwerp University. You get 70% right.
Yeah, I mean, what we try to argue here is that there's so much variance still in the perception of the emotion by individuals that the machine, if they give you 90% accuracy, they're doing something wrong. Because people will not give you 90% accuracy anyway. If you make a survey, you will have a variance. So there's not an objective truth of emotions in a text, and there's not an objective truth probably of such approach. So also, to some extent, all the computer science approach has a limitation, that there's not a thing to learn, there's a thing to approximate, or a heterogeneity to take into account, and at least requires another type of tools that are not so much developed. So if you have something quantitative, I'm really happy to deal with it. But if you need users or people measuring it, I try to avoid it also because of all the biases. And I never tried a survey study. I never design a survey because it's way away from my power. I mean, I just don't know how to ask a question to some layman or laywoman to really get some data from it. But I appreciate a lot these kind of studies.
I think the approach by just measuring the positivity, the balance of words, is good if you have enough data, and what the work of Johan Bohm showed can be used for very practical things. But when I look here, do you have that on the slide?
Yes.
Of words?
Well, I have the word
If I
here.
look at the most positive words, like home, world, people, free, these words are mostly used in a kind of
in the
context, not in the context of something
really positive.
Like I'm going home, or the world is this, or the world is that, or you're free to take to leave.
No, I will. Yes.
Positive. Because there are such common words, they are kind of
well. They have this little positivity that is also the point of the study. That is not very strong positivity that we look at, but we look at this baseline. So that is a consequence of this little baseline of ANU itself. I would say that home is an outlier because home in the internet is said to mention the home page. So that one is an outlier, and when I saw this one, I said, oh, this might be wrong. So that's why we used also. Yeah. True. I mean, we validated this also with the frequency from books, and we found the same. At least the correlation was not so strong, but was there.
People, then it sounds positive, but most of the time it's not using this exalted way of saying people. There are people on the stage, is it positive or is it negative?
Okay, that's something you need to ask the developers of the lexica. I mean, it's Peter Lang and Margaret Bradley that are the ones that made the survey, and then what was the context of people in their study. They gave them these mannequins, and people just happen to say that people is a bit positive. For some reason, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is this positive onset that you just need to say things that are positive, but at least the histogram of the lexica were unbiased, or at least not so much.
I think probably because the histograms should best take words that are not too common. Of course, they should not be too common in a technical word, but the really very common words like time, use, home, people, free, etc.
But the whole.
They are so empty of meaning and identity, you can really give them a balance.
Okay, so that's something to make a validation of ANU. Again, that nails down.
Words that are somewhat less common and that really can balance.
But then that's
peace or love or.
But
really have balance well.
Okay, what is then the threshold of frequency we have to take into account? I mean, we did not want to put any filtering of the data because we just wanted to look at the raw result without any ad hoc. Are just slightly positive. I mean, up to some point, maybe you're evaluating their balance already taking this into account. The amount of balance that you get from the word, but not really in the context when it's used. I mean, when you say people, maybe you're trying to say nice stuff.
But you would see if you take the big ones out.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that you can see it a bit here. The big one, the most frequent ones, well, the most positive are here, and they have some frequency. So maybe when you're talking about people and home and so on, there are these bars here. So if you take these bars from the histogram, still the median or the mean is shifted a bit towards zero, but it will not fall on zero. It's not that I'm talking about an extremely hardcore bar here that is changing the statistics. I mean, I think we could do some robustness, but then of course with 1,000 words is not so trustworthy.
If you take out the most common words, if those most common words tend to be positive, and they are by definition very common, that means that the words you are left with, some of them will become much less positive, supposedly, according to the measure. And then maybe all the other items might be less promoted because you are taking words that really have a balance, that are not this kind of very fuzzy balance like people.
I think it's also it's the balance of a noun, I think. And also the point is that that greenish color is also something that is more or less here. What is the baseline itself of the weights used?
And what are the variables?
No. So if you have a red color, it's -1. A green is here. A brown is 0. So you have slightly.
The browns, I agree, they are neutral.
Yes, but
the reds are definitely negative. But the greens.
What you're saying is that basically.
Most of the green, I see.
You're having a better evaluation of the word. You're saying this is positive but not so much. And basically I think those words are hitting the baseline here. This is our new neutral. The slightly positive is the new neutral, so the slightly green there is our new neutral. So it also makes some sense that when you're seeing something slightly green that is very frequent, it does not mean anything. And there maybe the ones that are slightly positive and very frequent are this higher bar here, basically. You know?
Yeah, I think one way to reduce the effect is indeed to move your 0 point
higher
from what's supposedly 0, but to something slightly positive.
Yeah.
I think another way would, as I said, leave out the most common words, you would probably get a different view, because the remaining words would have stronger balances and would be more informative and would discriminate better.
We have a collaborator that was studying on MySpace, and they removed love from the classification because it was used so often and in so many contexts, and it was completely lack of meaning. When somebody was saying love in MySpace discussions, they were teenagers and they were just, they had a lot of messages that were like, love, 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 I love you, love, love, love. And then they couldn't interpret this.
It's very common, it's very commonly used.
It's clearly positive. True.
Home, people, free.
But it depends on the culture, I would say. Because you cannot take love from European conversation out.
Yeah.
In the States, it's associated.
There, I think they needed to aggregate a lot of loves to have a single love. So they like bundle. If you say love 5 times, it really means that you love something. Yes, I'm not so sure.
You could look at the correlation with big words with other words. Find out if they're intrinsically positive.
In co-occurrence, I didn't look into these point-wise mutual informations or something.
But then you have to see also the language with the PH. It's not the same meaning, with the same attribute that you give to the...
That's true, no?
You could see also between age groups.
Terrific. What means terrific? It depends.
Yeah, originally it meant something bad. Saying awesome,
Yes. I mean, when we're dealing with internet data, we always assume that it's a bunch of teenagers. So it's just the parsimonious assumption. Also, they use a lot of strange terms that we cannot classify right now. Like, I remember we had a data set from Twitter in the UK during the Olympics, and then they were saying amazeballs very often. And this term did not appear in the classification, but they meant amazing. And all this kind of slang is, of course, something that we cannot really measure, and we need to devise new techniques for that. Yeah, that's true. I would say, I mean, right now when I'm analyzing something based on a new, what I do is that I do not report the raw valence score. What I do is basically a C-score compared to this distribution. So I say, if I have a text with 10 terms from a new, I just measure how much those terms are expected to deviate from the mean. So basically, those terms are deviated from it more than the standard deviation. Then I say this is positive, this is neutral, or this is negative. And I just have this coarse-grained approximation of what would be the baseline. And this reduces the amount of positive language that I have, or like highlights the negative one when it's really negative. So far, right now, I didn't publish anything with such kind of technique.
That would be able, that would allow you more easily to recognize the really positive.
Yes.
It's where the mood is really exceptional.
The first time we applied this was in product reviews because they are extremely positive. In this histogram here, the one with the highest bias is Amazon, because in general people have the self-selection to talk about what they liked and they bought. And there we applied it already, and we could get some statistics because in general in the beginning we did not have any positivity because everything was positive. You know, there was simply no positivity. And also a neutral review might mean a negative experience about the product because you are expecting to enjoy it. If you have a marketing specialist and they see a neutral review, they will think that the product is a failure. They need something that creates fanboys and so on.
Yeah, reviews, there you have a good external measure because a review normally has a number of stars that tells you about all So you cannot try to correlate the words in the review with the...
It does, yes. We correlated and
that works pretty well with
it. So there's a very interesting result.
The number of stars the review gives
from the text. Yes, we did, and it's possible to predict for the positive ones, for the standard reviews, but then negativity was different. It was not so simple to predict. So to some extent, negative reviews can have a lot of stars. That's the point. So there's even a stronger bias in the amount of stars. If you look at the stars of reviews, they usually have at least 3. So it's like a review with 3 stars is already a negative 1. So when we were mapping the stars to the valence, we were seeing that positive valence means positive amount of stars, very high, but negative valence does not mean negative amount of stars, or low one, it still means positive amount of stars. So the bias is even worse in the amount of stars.
If you have, let's say, 5 stars, then 4 stars might be the medium, and 5 would be positive, and everything under 4 would be negative.
If you want to say above or below average, then you would say that the baseline is really high. I mean, in recommender systems, they're worried about this, so they try to make all these systems that tell you what you would like to buy based on your reviews before and the reviews of other people. And the problem is that they're just talking about things that you would like, and they cannot say about things you will not like, because nobody ever says what they don't really like. Very, very few people do. That's why also people pay more attention to the negative reviews, because they're the very few that they ever find. Myself, at least when we aggregate per user and per product, and we look at the mean emotion and the mean amount of stars, this is in an upcoming publication that we have now, we see that at least the amount of stars seems to be positive valence, or the positive sentiment in the text, and the negative sentiment or the negative connotation of the text is not in the stars. So if there might be 2 dimensions to measuring the text, if there's a dimension of measuring positivity and a dimension of measuring negativity, the negativity will not appear in the stars, and it's only the positivity, the one that is mapped to the stars. So that we are using it because we are trying to argue with computer scientists why we do all this and we don't look just into stars. And we're telling them, well, the emotion in the text is telling us much more than just your biased little number of stars. Not only the quality of the product, but your experience about it. And that's what we think that it means now.
Yeah, but it's true that you should separate positivity from negativity. It's not just...
I mean, here I'm mixing them, but at least Sentistrand gives you 2 scores. It gives both. So there's a way to have both positivity and negativity at the same time in the text. While if we just average a new values, unless they are by model in the text, I don't think so. It's really difficult.
I've seen here in your thesis that you also have worked with the model of arousal. Can you map it onto this one? For example, that the sum of positivity
no.
and negativity would be arousal?
I did not do it in this analysis. I mean, I did it in the agent-based modeling and in the validation we did with physiological signals, but at least right now we don't really know very well how to get arousal from the text. Of course, we just sum positivity and negativity and say like intensity of the emotion maps to arousal, but also to some point here we are confounding a lot of things if we are doing that. So as a crude approximation for emotional intensity, I would say so, but for arousal, really 0 valence will map to
emotional intensity, yes.
Yeah, so if we have positivity and negativity and both are 0, will we say that this is -1 of arousal? Not necessarily. So there we have a non-linear mapping in between both dimensions that we want to be careful with. So at least we tried a bit with...
Why not simply if you add the positivity and the negativity and call that arousal, if it's both very positive and very negative, then there's a higher arousal. If there's very low positivity and very low negativity, it's... I don't care.
We have done that so far in Twitter, and it worked to tell us some statistics. So yeah, I think it's fine. The problem is the validation of this. We don't have any study in which people were sit in front of a text and say, what is the arousal of this text? Because I don't know. I mean, in general, people don't understand arousal very well.
Independent hypothesis about what arousal implies.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, one prediction I would make, for example, if the discussion at the beginning is characterized by high arousal, it's likely to create lots of responses. If there's low arousal, it's not going to get many responses.
We can, that's a really good, yeah, we can measure it.
A simple hypothesis to test.
This attention, yeah, we can measure it. I mean, that's good. We were scared always of the psychological interpretation of our studies. And if we are misusing some sentiment analysis technique. So we also try to be as conservative as possible with our output, especially because we noticed these kind of biases and we didn't know how trustworthy they were. So at least our collaborators in the project were struggling to get arousal classifications just by itself. So at least they were able to give us the classification of arousal of a whole discussion. So if you have a set of messages or a whole thread, how strong was the discussion in terms of activity? Right now, myself in the models, I proxy arousal by activity tendencies. So I simply say that when somebody's having a higher arousal, it's just creating more messages or in a shorter time frame than when they have more relaxed or sleepy state. That's my proxy so far. And then the communication, I just map it to valence only because I'm not so sure about arousal. But I think at large scales or like simple heuristics, we can do, yeah.
We have a model in which we work with challenges, and challenges are vectors in which there are positive and negative components. The positive ones represent positive balances, the negative represent negative balances, and the sum of the absolute values is the intensity of the challenge. And the intensity of the challenge would be something like the measure of arousal that it creates in the agent that receives the challenge. And the model assumes that the agents will typically choose to pay attention to those challenges that have the highest intensity. Because the intensity is really kind of both the degree of threat and the degree of opportunity that's in there. So that means the degree to which you need to pay attention, that you need to be aroused to take that challenge into account. If there isn't much positivity and there isn't much negativity, you can dismiss it and focus on something else. And I think that would be easy to measure. If you have positivity and negativity at separate dimensions, then you add the absolute values that you want. If it's high, it means high arousal. If there is not much positivity and not much negativity, it's low.
Yeah, okay. That's a really nice suggestion, yeah. I mean,
the simple hypothesis is the more arousal there is, the more activity, the more people will do things, will react, will send mails, will tweet, will do whatever you're measuring.
Myself, I tried this a little bit with open source development discussions. Here I have these Bugzilla tracks. So this means that people are reporting bugs in the OSS community, and then others are trying to solve them. So I was trying to measure if the activity of solving problems in the open source community was correlating with the arousal of the messages made by the people about the problems. And this, at least computer scientists, we know this as Balmer's peak. That means that when you're a bit drunk, you're better in programming because you're a bit more, your arousal is a bit higher. You're a bit more excited about programming, but if you are too drunk, you cannot program anymore. So that was the same thing. Try to measure if there's a peak in which arousal is helpful for the community to do things or for the individuals to do things, and then there's a moment in which it's too much and it leads to anxiety or conflict, or I'm not really sure. It might have another phase in which it doesn't help.
It could become too high, generally speaking, I would say that arousal is a measure of the activity that is expected. The more you're aroused, the more energy you have to invest into activity. So you can make the prediction if the arousal is high, the activity that will follow is likely to be high. But I think it's very important what we did before with the positivity and negativity to calibrate them. If you want to measure the arousal, you will really need to measure from your medium there, average,
from
and
here.
not, because otherwise everything will have a high positive
some arousal, no?
and then it will all have an arousal. It should really be positivity that extends beyond this average that counts to the arousal, and negativity,
I will dampen the positive component, so 5 of positivity is the same as 3 of negativity. I will just simply use a different weight for both.
So you need to have a different 0 point, and then you add the absolute values, positivity and negativity, and that will give you
that's good. I wonder how can I map this into such scaling for create the arousal metric. So I mean, if I come up with a ad hoc number of 80% positive, 80% negative and 20% positive, then of course this will always be criticized. I mean, if myself I'm reviewing a study that is adding this ad hoc rescaling, I would say, what are you based on? So maybe I could.
Not ad hoc, as you say.
We're using this, no?
You take the average and you declare the average to be 0.
Yeah.
You don't take the positivity minus the average value. That's just a read-on line.
Sounds good. Yes. And I think, this was based on a new, but we can also do the same or a very similar one from sentistrength, from the sentiment classification that gives us both scales. So then I think, actually when we are using sentistrength, we have also this positivity bias, yet it might not be exactly the same because of the weights program or the usage of negativity, negators and maximization, diminishation. They all take all these things into account. So maybe in the end, at the sentence level, I don't know if it will be this high. Maybe it's a bit not so strong, but I think if we could measure it and we could rescale both, it's a good one.
Another prediction I would make is, for example, in the productive use, that productive use with a higher arousal defined in this sense, that there will be more reviews.
More used?
More reviews.
More reviews. Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, if a book is controversial and people get very aroused by it, there will be lots of positive and lots of negative reviews, and then maybe also some kind of ambiguous reviews, while a book that nobody is really enthusiastic about, neither positively nor negatively,
Not less.
They need to add their own review to all the others.
And what is your definition of arousal?
Well, the sum of the positives and the negatives. If you're very positive and very negative, if you're either very positive or very negative or both, which can be, there are certain phenomena that you're both very enthusiastic and very angry about. Intensity,
Sounds good.
Intensity of the emotion. No. Because within one text, you can have one text that's mostly using neutral words, or one text that uses some very positive words with some very negative words.
Well, it's true that we will correct for the mean, which means we will measure the distance between positivity and negativity from the mean. So it will aggregate to the variance, the expected distance to the mean. So it's true that to assess any significance of such metrics should have to compare with the standard deviation, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. At such high levels of amount of information and so many messages and millions of texts, it's possible to do such comparisons. When you're comparing hundreds of reviews, then you have a problem. But when it's, I don't know, here in this one I only had 2 million reviews, but now we have, Amazon has exploded in amount of reviews, and now we have 20 million or so. But 100, I don't know, it's crazy. I don't even know how many anymore. So it's that's a good one. We explored this a bit already, at least in this OSS that I mentioned that we didn't publish yet, and another publication we had in a conference in computer science. And we found that it wasn't crazy, but we didn't believe so much in this metric.
What I miss a bit in your general approach is predictions based not just on the data. Predictions based, for example, on psychological or sociological models that say that if there are emotions of this kind, then we expect these and these activities to happen. This was a prediction I just made. Higher arousal means more activity. There may be other kind of predictions that you make. If there is, let's say, a highly negative sentiment, then it will create a reaction of this or that. Or if there is a highly positive sentiment, like what Johan did with Twitter, if there is a positive sentiment, people will be more inclined to buy stocks, so the stocks will go up. That was kind of a bit unexpected result. I don't think he really predicted that. He probably had an inkling if he started correlating the data. But Johan is a psychologist, so he also has some ideas of what it can mean.
I feel similar with this Eurovision analysis and Johan's work with the stock market. So we're looking at two very far things. And also he finds to predict the stock market, and I find to predict the mean interest rate of the sovereign bonds. So at least two of us start to be consistent in this kind of crazy things. It's a good one. I should send him the paper. I think then
I have to think about it. You can probably make more concrete predictions than just saying that some rough number like the stock exchange or the interest rate will go up. These are the things that economists, of course, are very interested in the stock exchange. But everybody knows that the moment it becomes predictable, it becomes a self-defeating prophecy because then people start to use it to predict it. And it's
the same as the Google predictor.
I'm more interested in in collecting emotions actually, knowing that a certain situation has certain emotional aspects, can you predict how collectively people will start to react?
I mean, this is the whole point of our agent-based modeling approach. So here I did not really show that because it's another line of research and I cannot really show everything I did in the last couple of years. But there we have this hypothesis of, basically activity driven by arousal and then process of valence adopting to the information that is contained in the discussion. And at least there we can already hypothesize the existence of levels of high activity and low activity that are really qualitatively different, in the sense that there's some sort of, I don't know how to call it, it's like I'm tired regime, in which you are reading something, you're very excited about it, you write about it, and there's a point in which you cross a line and you say, I don't care about this anymore, and you stop writing. So with this agent-based model, we had a way to predict this. The only thing is that it still has so many free dimensions, and we wanted to validate this with individual dynamics first. We applied it to some extent to product reviews and to these IRC channels and found that it reproduces some of these collective emotions, but now we find a consistent approach. We don't want to be the crazy physicist that has an ad hoc model with whichever rules and then reproduces anything. We want to have a consistent result from the individual dynamics and the collective ones. So right now we think we did enough in the collective, we want to be sure on the individual and then go to the collective. And individual we find consistent results with what were our hypotheses. Like, for example, writing a message induces an instant decrease of arousal. Like the fact that you have written something has an instant relaxation. So if you don't get a reply, you are less likely to go on writing to some extent. You get relaxed by it, because otherwise this will introduce a positive feedback loop that will lead to absurd amount of arousal, and we know that this does not happen. So first, if you're alone, you relax to some extent, but also the fact of writing seems to be inducing such relaxation. This one of our assumptions for the model, and we are lucky that it happens to seem true. So we are trying to have a consistent model based on all these things, but of course there are so many facets. Yes, the model is there and part of the validation is there too, but we're working on right now with a psychologist within the project. And the problem is that, of course, analyzing so many psychological signals is quite messy. I mean, it's so many things happening at the same time in an individual human while reading something that we need to be very careful and very methodological in analyzing them. So far we aggregated analysis from 3 different experimental studies with people in front of threats and measuring their physiological signals and so on, and then also a couple of studies with the PDAs in their normal daily life. And at least I would say that quite some of the assumptions that we made in our initial models seem to hold. For example, exponential relaxation of emotions, relaxation of arousal when writing, similar feelings of balance according to what you're reading and so on, but still there are 1,000 other things to test, like how fast does information decay in the online medium? Like you post something today and in 2 days it's already forgotten, and measuring this is also very difficult. Or what is the weighting of the attention between positive and negative information when it is presented at the same time? We will need to draw 100 different experiments to test all these kind of things.
That's also the problem with these complex systems models, is they have lots of free parameters and you can't test them easily by experiment because you have to control so many parameters.
True.
Yeah, it's also one of our problems. But another thing, when I think about collective emotion, is alignment. The fact that you have a number of people who start out with somewhat different feelings and then by communication start to align towards the same emotion. Have you had any research that might have measured or observed that?
I mean, empirically speaking, not really. I mean, in our modeling framework, we assumed some possible different functions of the reaction of the valence to the content, in the sense that you could have a linear equation that means that you are imitating the other's emotion, or you might have a nonlinear one that means that if the other's emotion is the same as you, it becomes stronger, but if it's in the opposite side of the valence, yours becomes stronger too, like you react. But that's a bit mapping with opinion dynamics. There we don't know anymore what we are talking about. It's a more complex phenomenon that is not only core affect. There you already have additional semantics of what is the position of a person, or when do you react more emotionally to some other people, different emotions. I think there might be a simplification of the reaction of a person into the emotional content, But I think this simplification depends on a wealth of information that might depend again on emotion, on opinions, or on positions, or things like that. So myself, right now, I can only recall some analysis of like people polarizing in product reviews and things like that, but not really in any individual testing of how this happens. No. What we do is that in another line of research in our chair, we look into the wisdom of crowds. So when you are confronting a set of people with a question and they have to find an answer that is just a guess, usually their mean is better than experts trying to answer this question. It's a known effect in sociology. So if you let them talk, are they going to reach a better approximation or not? The point is that on average they reach a better approximation, but also this social interaction destroys the heterogeneity, and even though they are closer to the truth, in their variance they are also farther from the truth, like they don't cover the truth as they were doing it before. So the wisdom of crowds basically tells you that you have, the experiment of the cow and so on. So here, if you put people to talk with each other, we have a preprint of my collaborators, and they happen that on average their mean gets closer to the real answer, but also their variance gets shorter. Like, so to speak, the broadness of the distribution of their opinions is not so wide, and in the end you have more people far from the truth than before they actually talked. Exactly, so they ask questions that had an answer. For example, they asked something like, what is the length of the border between Switzerland and Italy? So these are objective questions and they have to make a guess, and when you let people talk to each other, they happen to reach a consensus which it's better on average, but is worse on the head.
Alignment is...
They basically align because if they were not interacting, they would be more heterogeneous. That would be, in a physical sense, is an alignment. Yeah, true. I mean, this is what we're trying to ask now with this SNF project. Yeah, we want to see when people align and basically de-align or polarize during online interaction. No, because we just started the project, so we don't have anything yet.
I have written kind of a review paper about these topics.
Okay, that would help. I mean, we just got the proposal accepted, and now 3 years of research we will try. We work a bit with political scientists also to try to apply this to real politics and the questions of democracy and e-democracy and how the internet plays a role and so on. So
It's not about numbers anymore.
What? It's not about numbers.
That's not about getting the number of the...
Exactly. No, this is much richer, and also the whole point is if online interaction is enough for users or for individual voters to make a decision and to construct an opinion. At least myself, when I see something online, I would say that 99% of it does not help me at all to make an opinion. It might only make me angry or excite me or something. It's not really creating any kind of rational process of me creating something that I'm more comfortable with, and I agree more. It does the opposite. It makes me be angry with whoever person.
Yeah, because I think the main assumption is that there is a process that helps a process. When you e-democracy, something like that happens, and people start twittering it happens, or whether there is a process where somebody guides a group.
Aha.
It's a huge difference.
We hope there are some universal behavior, and there's something that allows us to compare. I mean,
all the e-democracy projects in the US and here and wherever, they're always being guided.
yes. So first of all, there's this whole question of mobilization. Yeah, they want to have this mobilization, and they spend a lot of money to have their cave of specialists that are guiding the news and so on and the discussions. And we want to ask, how does this happen in the real internet, so to speak? In the point in which some user is posting something, and other users that are not particularly mobilized by a particular party, how are they building up their opinion? Up to some point, I am afraid that there's a lot of fetishization of the online medium in this sense, that people think that it can do anything, and especially Twitter. I mean, you have 140 characters. How much can you interact there? I mean, we call this communication, but at the end of the day, just a lot of noise. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't say that polarization is bad, but I would say that we don't know exactly how it's happening right now on the internet. Yeah.
There's phenomena of groupthink.
Mm-hmm. I had that in the beginning when I was designing the project. I thought a bit about groupthink because there are all these editorial websites in which they share news and they vote for news positively and negatively. So they end up having some kind of editorial line that is emerging from their voting behavior. So that is basically the definition of groupthink. But we had to focus into some field. So then we try to focus only on the polarization, which will be the opposite of groupthink, basically, or like how the groupthink is destroyed by this interaction, which it might be good. That's the point. I mean, I don't try to put any ethical label on our findings themselves. We just want to look at the fact.